Okay, let's finish up Quentin here. This shouldn't take too long. We were almost to the end, but the last video was going long. When we last left Quentin, he was um, finished with his dragon flashback and thinking about friendship, and then he hears another crash, which is where we're going to get the next group of characters coming in. And so Quentin thinks, someone's here, looters. The kind of nice, realistic thing about Quentin being in the pyramid with the dragon is that, yeah, people would stay away from the dragon and he'd be safe. So allow him some time to heal and recover and things like that. But at some point, you know, people might come because this is a world where life is cheap and there's a lot of wealth inside this pyramid. So he of course thinks looters, maybe the kin of Allah is coming back, and so Quentin thinks about that, and he rose from bread grabbing the hilt of Kagos Eric with his one good hand. um, and this is just once again, there's so many characters in Ice and Fire with an injured hand. um, Obviously Jamie having no hand, John having his injured hand, John Connington losing feeling in his hand, Theon losing feeling and ability to use his hand. It kind of just, and so why not just throw another on the pile with Quentin, and of course throw another Valyrian weapon that can possibly be used later in the story into the mix too. Since it was introduced with Kago, it seems a shame to leave such a very interesting weapon behind. Anyway, so he made it to as far as the open door. He could hear the footsteps now, several men coming up the stairwell. There was some discussion on with editors on where exactly are the people and how fast are they coming up, and we kind of try to make it as ambiguous as possible here, and just because we don't really know how these pyramids kind of work. But um, you know very quickly he just says who's there, calling off in the hallway, his voice raw and cracking. um, and then of course this one is not here to harm you. Missandei always speaks with this one, referring to herself, unless she's correcting herself, where she says this one and then says I mean I. But she speaks with this one because they're taught not to value the self as slaves. And of course she's right behind him, which is something she does to Barristan in A Dance with Dragons. She just sort of appears places, which of course gives everyone a this idea that perhaps Missandei is a faceless man, perhaps. So Quentin reeled around but saw no one. That's a little joke here that he saw no one. It's undecided whether or not Missandei is actually a faceless man at this point, but um, we'll leave it open. We'll garden a little. So he lowers his gaze and he meets her molten color eyes. Molten gold dragon eyes. So it's interesting, all the different, what he thinks about these eyes, because in this sense, like, the eyes are similar to the children of the forest, with Missandei having eyes like that, but at the same time they're similar to the eyes of the dragon and the eyes of the mother. There's a lot of just connecting all of these kind of ideas together. These watching eyes. So panic gripped him and he pulled back the Eric and he says, no, it's a girl, he realized. And he checks the blade and then he recognizes her from the scribe from Nath. The idea is that as you're going through this, that he's not really remembering the name. So he kind of, he says, scribe from Nath. And then we're still kind of, it's still kind of a mystery who's there. I mean, you can piece it together if you get scribe from Nath, but there's still that piecing together aspect. And then we hear Frog Boy is there. gruff voice up from the hall. Frog Boy, of course, Quentyn is called Frog, and then made fun of later for it. But he was given Frog by the Windblown. And so Quentyn looked back through the idea of the Frog Prince, would get kissed by the princess and become a real boy, and all of that never didn't happen. Instead he's kissed by fire. Quentyn looked back through the door, and through the gloom he had 4 Giscari men, pit fighters by his guess. His left hand gripped the Eric tight, but their own weapons were sheathed. 3 of the men he could see were wielding only dog sausages, and the 4th he could smell was a pot of the unborn hedgehogs. And so here we kind of get into this kind of ridiculousness. Now, the reason that these characters are here is that these are the leftover characters from A Dance with Dragons. Yeah, there's other squires, but they weren't close to being ready to fight. Barristan actually thinks about the squires that are capable of going out with him into battle, and he thinks about the Lamb. He thinks about Red Lamb. He thinks about Tumco Low. He thinks about Larrick the Lash, and he thinks about the 3 Giscari brothers. But then he doesn't bring the 3 Giscari brothers. So I guess at the last moment he decides they're not quite there. So they exist as characters. They're close to being good fighters. They're not there, but they're close. So I feel like they should be in the story. And so, and obviously we've got Strong Belwas, and we have Missandei with our leftovers who are now here, playing. This is kind of the joke that we have these leftovers, these forgotten, left behind people who are playing this big role. It's the same. We're doing the same thing with Barristan, where these leftover Dothraki are going to be playing such an important role, that these afterthoughts that are actually like very important. And so this is why we have these 3. And so Quentyn is, of course, very distrustful. There was some discussion over like how should Quentyn be responding, because obviously the audience loves Missandei and the audience loves Strong Belwas, and they like these characters returning, but Quentyn doesn't really know them, and so he should still mistrust them, even if maybe he can learn to love Strong Belwas later, but still, like, this is a big, intimidating man, so and so here we're getting just a little more that Missandei is smarter than she lets on, which is something that Barristan talked about in A Dance with Dragons, but here she's just much more she's a little more mask off than she is in A Dance with Dragons. She's smarter. She has a plan. And so Quentyn says, "Oh, is that Belwas?" And the bald man was a great deal thinner, with his brush with death, and paler too, dark circles under his eyes, scarred flesh. And then he wonders for a second, like if he could take these guys in a fight, and then thinks, no, that only made him think of himself dead, covered in shards of pottery and slum of hedgehogs. And so, because he's, of course, fighting left-handed, though he probably would have lost right-handed too. And this is another little joke. These are our companions, the Squire of Sir Barristan. Their names are Gaznak, Gazdan, and Grasdan. They in the Windblown chapter, Quentyn thinks about Giscari and their names, and he says it seems like everyone's named Gaznak, Grasdan, or Gaznak, Gazdan, or Grasdan. And he specifically says, like, it seems like everyone's named that. So I was like, oh, what are 3 perfect names for the 3 brothers? Well, those names, So this is why he kind of like has the of course they are. But this is a specific reference back to another Quentyn chapter where he's thinking about that. This is the same conversation as like everybody's Harzu, Um, they're sharing brothers, sharing the same pinch nose. Pinch nose, just kind of a George R. Martin kind of thing that he throws around. Of an age of with Quentyn, this idea that they're not experienced, the others being a little longer, and then he kind of mistrusts them. Are you here for food, for loot? And he's like, go to the kitchen, get the cutlery, and get out of here. And then they say, oh, we're not here for wealth, but for you. And he says, oh, for me. He's still distrustful because they want to punish me for releasing the dragons. And then Strong Belwas comes in. Now, Strong Belwas, it's hard to get the voice for Strong Belwas. I think I talked about this on stream a little, a bit. How Strong Belwas is portrayed in A Clash of Kings is different from how he's portrayed in A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons. He's much smarter the first time we meet him. His language, his cadence, the words he uses is different in A Clash of Kings. I guess he goes from more like Yoda to being more like Hulk, but not exactly either. Like, he's not as dumb as Hulk, but like he's close in A Storm of Swords and A Clash of, and A Dance with Dragons, while in A Clash of Kings he's much smarter. And he doesn't always refer to himself in the third person. He says I in A Clash of Kings. He doesn't do it later on. Loses that ability. So that's the joke that Trey said that he was, he goes from getting hit on the head with that platter, but nonetheless, Belwas actually comes. It's kind of we settled on a compromise that he's smarter. He's smarter than a Storm of Swords, but he's dumber than A Clash of Kings. But he starts saying some things that are, he's trying to communicate ideas, and he's not as dumb as he seems. He kind of says, he's eating. He's such a, let's see. Somebody commented on something actually here that I wanted to fix. Yes, Yulin Wasende, you're useful. Strong Belwas. Does I have an error here? Strong Belwas flashed a toothy grin, then sucked a hedgehog into his mouth hole. Should take away this hole because fetal hedgehogs, they're going to be tiny. I don't know if you guys ever had hamsters or anything when you're young. Tiny little babies, so they're going to be tiny. So he can suck. He might even suck more than one hedgehog. I don't know. Toothy grin and then sucked a hedgehog into his mouth. Oh, well, one's fine. Then crunched his way through it. Maybe a handful of hedgehogs into his mouth. I don't know. We should fix this. As he crunched his way through them, he went on. War is inside the city. War is outside city. War is inside city. War is outside city. Strong Belwas never uses the word, or he never uses He does occasionally use the, but he never uses the word Things are bad. Quentyn let out a bark of laughter. I'm only burned, neither blind nor deaf. Who rules the city? Not Hisdar, I wager. And this is the whole thing is Shave Pate all the way through A Dance with Dragons is trying to gain power. People forget about this, but he wanted to marry Dany too. And Dany was considering a marriage to him versus Hisdar. But he's like not powerful enough family. He was always kind of a lower rung of the rich families, which is why he finds being a Shave Pate a power move. So he kind of says here that so him taking power is exactly what he's been saying he's going to do the entire story, and Barristan exiting the city is his perfect opportunity to do that. And so they say, oh, it's not Hisdar. His magnificence, Hisdar's Oloric, is deep beneath the pyramid, screaming day and night. This is kind of to add some more violence and darkness to the chapter that Hisdar is getting tortured. It might have been, confusing which one, who knows which brother is named Gasnak, Gaston, or Gaston. and Shavepay's taking his fingers one by one until he confesses. This is, to parallel the torturing of the Blue Bard and the torturing of Theon and things like that. Until he confesses the poisoning attempt. And so this is to bring up the poisoning attempt. So to kind of bring up the locust of Marines theory and things like this. So is Shavepay king. Skahaz Mokandak styles himself first citizen of Marine, leader among equals. This is a reference to Rome, that the Augustus Caesar, and they didn't refer to themselves as emperor. They referred to themselves as princeps. That's first citizen, but of course they're nothing more than dictator emperors. So the name is propaganda. So his first, and Skahaz is doing the same thing here, a leader among equals. Which is, I think this is more, leader among equals is more poking fun, I think, at the like the Stalinists. So his first edict was to was the gates of Marine stay closed, and then for every brazen beast cut down, the noble family shall provide restitution. This is exactly what he was saying all the way through A Dance with Dragons, that they needed to start killing noble families one for one. This is actually I did a video on this principle that George first started talking about it in an old wildcard story called the Journal of Xavier Desmond, and when he was talking about Israel Palestine. And there's a character called the Hound in that story who is very much Skahaz. And the Hound wants to I think he wants to kill 3 for every one of his that die. More escalating. Skahaz is only 1 for 1, but even on a 1-to-1 basis, it's a horrible idea to have a policy of like one of ours dies, one of yours dies, So, but nonetheless, here he has it, like noble families will provide restitution for every brazen beast cut down. And so this is why he's executing the cupbearers, blood for blood, life for life. This is all repeated in the Daenerys and Barristan chapters. And then he says, that's not justice, it's vengeance. So the justice vengeance thing is brought up a few times throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. Tyrion specifically actually says earlier. No, is it? I think that there's maybe there's a Ned. There might be a Ned thing where he says we're talking about justice, not vengeance. And I think Tyrion might bring it up too. But it's a pretty common discussion. I'm trying to let me filter because I want to get that Ned quote again because it's where is it? A Tyrion. The king, justice, all justice flows from the king. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was not Ned. Maybe it is Tyrion. Oh no, I'm sorry. Here it is. In Eddard 11, he says, "Do we have our leave to take vengeance against Sir Gregory?" Mark Piper said. Mark Piper asked the throne. "Vengeance," Ned said. "I thought we were speaking of justice." And that's I always love that line, and I think it really speaks well to it. And then I think here it is. In A Storm of Swords, Tyrion 1, would that a council seat where all Martells came to claim. Lord Tywin said, "You promised him vengeance as well." Tyrion replies, "I promised him justice." So this is but of course, like, there's such conflation of these concepts. Like when Oberyn comes to King's Landing, he claims that he's there for justice. But Doran, back in Dorne, is always talking about vengeance. And so there's the understanding and conflating these concepts is a big part of the themes of the book. Okay, so and then I have this little backstory for Missandei, which it's a little shoved in, but I did think it was a neat little very small thing that George R. R. Martin added that I wanted to highlight some. But in the Daenerys story starts out with the death of Stalwart Shield, and it specifically said that he cuts down, like, that he was fighting at 6 people, and that perhaps he cut and wounded them, and that they're going to check for, like, wounded people. And then in the next chapter, 6 people are murdered. And so I always like that little clue that they're doing this blood for blood thing, that clearly 6 people tried to kill Stalwart Shield and they died. And then someone was like, crap, six people need to die. And the tit for tat went on and on. And that's so much of the Dany story, with this escalation. And so I always thought I think it was, I wanted to just highlight this by bringing it up again. So she says, when the queen's servant Stalwart Shield was murdered, he cut down 6 before he died. 6 more servants were taken, among them one called Mosador. Mosador was this one's brother. It is the way of Gis, not Gis the world. And then we get to Strong Belwas actually being a little smart here. Keep in mind that we don't really know if Strong Belwas is smart or dumb, because he's speaking a language that is not his first language, and so we all we hear him say are short things about eating and fighting, but there might be more to him. So he says, "Ugly man shaves his head," Belwas said through a mouthful of hedgehog, "but you can still see tiny hair like the great masters, but very short." So this idea is that, like, yes, he's seeing the stubble, but he doesn't, obviously, whatever they're speaking, if they're speaking Common or High Valyrian, it's the second language. So he doesn't know the word for stubble, so he says tiny hair. Hair like the great masters, but very short. Same for his rule. So he's saying that, like, these shave pates, yeah, they're cutting their hair, but they're all the same as the people that have the wise masters with their fancy hairdos. And that's the whole premise of the shave pate, is that, and Hizdar, is that the wise masters had these elaborate hairstyles, and that the shave pates were saying, let's completely throw away our old culture and start anew. Shave it off. That's what the whole thing is. And then Hizdar cuts his hair short. He's not a shave pate. He's not an old Marine person. He's the compromise, right? And it's all kind of laid out in the hairstyles in Marine. And this is kind of an important thing, So, like, when Hizdar first comes to Dany, he's got the fancy hair and she doesn't like it, and then he cuts his hair to try to impress her, like trying to communicate to her, I'm a man of compromise. But here Belwas is saying, it doesn't matter. Hair is hair. They're all the same, So, but then he makes the joke that hair like the great masters, but very short. Same for his rule, short rule. He guffawed and leaned over, exposing a naked scalp. Strong Belwas is not shave head, no hair. See, so he's saying he's pure. Strong Belwas will kill ugly man for little Missandei and wipe his ass with the cloak he wears. And then it's like, why not bring up the locust of Marine theory? And so Quentyn thinks back about the story about the events of A Storm of Swords, where Belwas fights Oznak's Opal and kills him, and then craps next to his body and wipes his ass with a cloak, and he's humiliated for all the world to see. And of course, like the first thing, and it's quite logical that Tyrion would come to this conclusion. Like he just thinks about his own family. Like how would they react? How would they react if they had a champion and they sent Martell, like Oberyn Martell out, and someone humiliated Oberyn Martell? Like the family would be searching for vengeance. Like that's just the first thing he thinks of. And of course, that is the plot. Like that is what happens in A Storm of Swords, and to A Feast for Crows. You know, like the Sand Snakes do want to get vengeance for Oberyn's death and his humiliation. So I never like, I always thought that of all of my theories, the most logical one that really everyone should be on board with is that House Paul killed Strong Belwas, or poisoned Strong Belwas. Belwas didn't die. I always thought it was the most grounded, most boring, most obvious like theory. But strangely, it has very few people subscribe to it. I mean, I understand, like, you know, my fans might, but like I've seen surveys like where people are like, who poisoned the locusts? And like House Paul like gets this very low percentage. And I'm like, how? It's just, to me, it's just so obvious. Like, you know, like, especially when they're like, House Paul is leaving the pits. When Drogon comes and things like this, like it's just so it's just so logical that they would want to poison Belwas in a public location like this. But and so in that video, I don't think I outlined that like it's happening, like the Martell family is exactly that plot, but here Quentyn is thinking about it and would immediately come to the same conclusion. So he blurts out, "It wasn't for me. The poison was meant for Daenerys." And so they kind of all go, "Oh, right, yeah." And then he's like, "Old ladies must die," which is what he at the end of A Dance with Dragons he says, "Someone poisoned me. People must die." And so he says, "Old ladies must die." That's just a continuation of what he'd said like before, just more specific. And so he says, "No, enough of this, no more. We should leave the city." And then he's got to get his friends. So he's like, "You escaped the Great Pyramid with those brazen beasts. How?" And again, we're kind of like going down this like subverted expectations. He's thinking about this great plan, this scheme to break into the pyramid. He's been thinking about it the whole chapter, and it's just this wild goose chase because they're not even there. Like they're not even there. But like Arch and Drake aren't even there. But he's like, "Oh, the Great Door, the Great Pyramid has all these secret passages. There's doorways known to a few." I purposely chose the word doorways here because that's the George R. R. Martin pilot show that didn't get picked up. Secret passages. We're making this parallel to the Red Keep with all of the secret passages that Varys knows about. And so he's remembering the dark labyrinth beneath the pyramid, and then he's thinking, "Oh, maybe one leads to his friends." And he's like, "Can we get them?" And they're like, "No, they're outside the wall." Outside. So the wine he drunk turned sour in his stomach. I realized that when we first wrote this, that there was a lot of references to his stomach churning, and I had to remove a few of them because I'm just like, we can't be talking about his stomach so much. So then she mentions that they were sent to the Tattered Prince to sway the wind blowing, and he's like, "Oh, but Tatters." The idea is that old guy earlier he saw was the Tattered Prince. So he's like, "But Tatters he should be like super injured or dead." But she's like, "Oh, dead. I was the one with him. He was smiling." And so now we reveal that the person that died in Quentyn's bed, or in Daenerys's bed, was not Quentyn, but the Tattered Prince. And so, but even Quentyn doesn't really know about it. It's not really Quentyn's personality to take part in something so cruel, or whatever happened to the Tattered Prince, to the Tattered Prince. So this is where Quentyn kind of says, what happened? George R. Martin doesn't explain everything right away, so exactly what Drink did, we'll probably come to later. But right now, Quentyn is thinking, whatever he did, it's not very honorable. What had he done? So, and and then he's like, oh yeah, I guess that would explain why, if they thought Quentyn died, that no one would come looking for him in the pyramid. So he says, oh, very quite clearly, Prince of Tatters died, the Prince of Dorne, but you knew. Why didn't you tell Sir Barristan? Why help us? And of course, like, it is true that the Quentyn is alive theory does rely on Missandei not outing him, which is, she's sitting next to this body for 3 days. Obviously, she's going to know if the guy has a Dornish accent versus a Pentashi. Is he going to be speaking whatever Pentashi Valyrian thing, or is he going to be speaking common tongue? Like, obviously, Missandei would know that, but she keeps it to herself because she seems to be playing her own game. And so she says, but her excuse is, the children of the queen spared you. This it's not for this one to condemn, and it would not have saved the dying man. And so Quentyn hears that and doesn't believe it. Immediately, he's just like, but twice he'd been spared, but why? The girl plays her own game, but he didn't know what it was. So now he felt lost. His friends are outside. He doesn't know what this little girl's game is, and now they're in the fray. I don't know what to do. And then we say Strong Belwas likes Whitebeard. Whitebeard is, of course, like Arstan Whitebeard was Sir Barristan's hidden identity for A Clash of Kings in the first part of A Storm of Swords. So Belwas sometimes calls him Whitebeard, or at least he does at the very end of A Dance with Dragons. And then he says, Strong Belwas likes Whitebeard. He is my squire, and he is outside. So this was, of course, Arstan Whitebeard was supposedly Strong Belwas' squire. That was his cover, but I think it's kind of because Strong Belwas is a braggart, or maybe he's making a joke, or maybe he legitimately still thinks that Barristan is his squire because he's so arrogant, that he would call him his squire. He is my squire. And so then we have the other brother. It's too bad he wasn't really worked in earlier. We just couldn't figure out a way to bring him up. But Marcellin is the other brother. He is beyond the wall, so he is the last kin to me, but that gives her a motivation for wanting to open the gate as well. And so then one of the brothers just says that, very simply, well, then we rescue them. Sir, your brother, your friends, we rescue them all. Sir, as squires often call the knight just Sir. So he's sort of referring to Barristan, your brother Marcellin, and your friends Arch and Drink. We rescue them all. And he says, "Oh, rescue, that's impossible. Saving Arch and Drink for themselves was one thing, but now they have to gather an army. And there's this battle outside. Like, it's too late. How?" And they say, "Oh, well, we open a gate, give the soldiers safe haven to retreat to." This is bringing back earlier in the chapter where, Quentyn saw the gate and saw the people guarding the winch. It's like, a gate, have 100 brazen beasts, guard each one. We have no time to hire swords. And as it stands, we are but 6. No, Missandei smiled. We are 7. This is, obviously a reference to the faith of the 7 and the idea that 7 is their fortuitous lucky number. But Arianne thinks the same thing when she goes off into the desert, that they are 7, and that it's some sort of lucky, nice thing, when in fact it's disaster. But yeah, and so then we get the pyramid shaking, making it clear that the 7 being, you've got the 3 brothers, Belwas, Missandei, Quentyn, and then the 7th being Viserion the dragon. And so then he repeats his mantra, "Mother have mercy," and it all comes back. And that was that was Quentyn. I think it came together pretty well. Uh, and I think it's leading somewhere um, good. I can't think of any other reason why, or I mean, a way to have kind of split the dragons up, because it seems pointless to not split the dragons up. Like, why have three dragons if they're not going to be having three different um, adventures and three different uses? Like, why just have them all be with, say, two be with Danny and one be with somebody else? It just seem weird. So it seems like they should be split up. And so the idea is, like, who would be flying it, who would be controlling this dragon. um Quentyn just seems like the person to do it. I mean, some people argue that Tyrion would be the person to do it, but I don't know. Quentyn seems more interesting to me. um and then Victarion, would have another. And so, where Quentin's going to go next, I think he's probably going to head back to Westeros along the Demon Road. And so we can see the Demon Road, which is, brought up in the Merchant's Man chapter. So that's probably where it's going to go next. Anyway, so that was that. And yeah, next time we'll have a Tyrion 3, close out the battle and see what happens with these guys' plan. All right. Thanks for watching. See you next time.